The flashing red and blue lights cut through the night as Officer Reynolds tightened his grip on the wheel. Another routine stop. Another suspect who fit the description. But as he stepped out of the patrol car, something about this man felt different. Dressed in a sharp suit, calm under pressure, the man barely flinched as Reynolds approached. "License and registration," Reynolds demanded, his voice laced with authority. The man didn't argue. Didn't panic. He simply handed over his ID with an unsettling confidence. But when Reynolds glanced at the name, his stomach twisted. This wasn't just some random civilian, this was someone with power. Someone untouchable. A creeping sense of unease settled in as Reynolds ran the name through his system. The screen loaded and then it happened. A government alert flashed in bold red letters, "Restricted clearance, federal operative." His pulse spiked. He looked up, but the man was already watching him, a knowing smirk forming on his lips. Reynolds had made a mistake. A big one. And now he wasn't the one in control anymore. Reynolds' grip tightened on the ID as a cold shiver ran down his spine. He had pulled over hundreds of people in his career, but this was something else. The man in front of him wasn't nervous, wasn't defiant, he was patient. Almost like he was waiting for something. "Step out of the vehicle," Reynolds ordered, masking the sudden doubt creeping into his voice. The man tilted his head slightly, as if studying him. Then, with precise, deliberate movements, he unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped out. He stood tall, his suit perfectly pressed, his posture eerily controlled. "You sure about this, officer?" His voice was calm, measured. There was no hostility, no fear, just a quiet confidence that set Reynolds further on edge. Hands on the car, Reynolds snapped. He didn't care who this guy was. Rules were rules. He had a job to do. The man complied, placing his palms flat against the sleek black sedan. Reynolds patted him down, searching for anything suspicious. Nothing. No weapon, no contraband. But something still felt off. Reynolds glanced back at his patrol car, at the flashing alert still pulsing on the screen. Federal operative. Do not detain. Contact supervisor immediately. His jaw clenched. Contact his supervisor? That would mean admitting he had screwed up, that he had stopped someone he shouldn't have. His pride wouldn't allow it, not yet. He pulled out his radio, hesitating for just a second before pressing the button. "Dispatch, I need a check on." Before he could finish, the man spoke. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Reynolds froze. Slowly, he turned back. The man was still facing the car, but now his head was slightly turned, his expression unreadable. "I don't take orders from civilians," Reynolds said, though the words felt hollow. The man let out a small chuckle. "Civilians? Is that what you think I am?" He turned around fully now, slow and deliberate, his eyes locking onto Reynolds. They were sharp, focused, like he could see straight through him. Reynolds instinctively reached for his holster. "Stay where you are." For the first time, the man's expression shifted. A flicker of something disappointment? Amusement? He let out a breath and shook his head. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into," he said. Reynolds felt his pulse hammering against his ribs. He had been a cop for years, had faced down criminals, gang members, even armed suspects. But this was different. This man wasn't scared. He wasn't angry. He was just waiting. And then, before Reynolds could react, the man reached into his jacket. "Don't move!" Reynolds barked, drawing his weapon in a flash. But the man didn't stop. He pulled out something small, black, and sleek. Not a gun, but something just as dangerous. A badge. Not a police badge. Not FBI. But something higher. Something classified. Reynolds barely had time to register it before headlights flooded the street. A black SUV rolled up beside them, silent and smooth. Two men in dark suits stepped out, their faces unreadable, their movements precise. One of them spoke into an earpiece. "We have a situation." Reynolds' stomach twisted. This wasn't just some high-ranking officer. This man had backup. The kind that didn't need uniforms. The man in the suit tucked his badge back into his pocket and gave Reynolds a long, measured look. "You need to let me go. Now." Reynolds' grip on his gun tightened. His mind raced. If he let this man go, would he regret it? Would he be covering up something he shouldn't? But if he didn't, what exactly was he up against? The SUV's passenger door opened, and a woman stepped out. Her presence sent a ripple of tension through the air. She was younger than the others, but her eyes carried the same sharpness, the same weight of authority. She looked straight at Reynolds and spoke firmly. "Officer, stand down." Reynolds hesitated. He could hear his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He had started this, but now it was spiraling out of his control. The man in the suit took a step closer, his voice quiet but firm. "There are bigger things at play here than you understand." Reynolds looked from him to the woman, then to the men by the SUV. He didn't know what was happening, but one thing was clear. He had just stepped into something far bigger than a traffic stop. Reynolds' heart pounded in his chest as he stood frozen, his gun still drawn, his mind racing through 1,000 different possibilities. The street felt eerily quiet despite the low hum of the black SUV's engine. The woman in the suit held his gaze, unwavering, her expression unreadable. Everything in his training told him not to back down, not to relinquish control of the situation. But deep down, he knew he had never been in control to begin with. The man he had stopped, the one who had barely flinched through the entire encounter, adjusted his cuffs, taking his time as if none of this concerned him. Then, with an almost casual air, he stepped forward. Reynolds instinctively tensed, his finger dangerously close to the trigger. "Relax," the man said. "If I wanted to hurt you, you'd already know." Reynolds clenched his jaw. "Who the hell are you?" The woman sighed, stepping between them. "That's classified." Reynolds let out a bitter laugh. "Classified? You expect me to just accept that?" The two men by the SUV hadn't moved an inch, their presence heavy like shadows waiting for the right moment to act. The woman, however, softened just slightly. "Officer, I understand this is unusual, but you need to trust me when I say that the man you've stopped is on assignment. A very sensitive one." "Then why was he driving around like any other guy?" Reynolds challenged. "Why not?" "Because sometimes," the man interrupted, his voice calm but firm, blending in is the job. Something about the way he said it sent another shiver down Reynolds' spine. He didn't want to admit it, but every second that passed, it became clearer that he was in way over his head. Still, his pride wouldn't let him back down so easily. "I pulled you over for a reason," he said. "Your car matched a suspect's description in an armed robbery." The man raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Do I look like someone who robs convenience stores?" Reynolds hesitated. No, he didn't. He looked like someone who had access to things far beyond his clearance. The woman spoke again, her voice even. "The suspect you were looking for was driving a similar vehicle, but your system didn't give you the full plate. This was a mistake. One that you should walk away from before it turns into something worse." The warning hung heavy in the air. Reynolds swallowed hard. He knew a threat when he heard one, even when it was wrapped in professionalism. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Reynolds lowered his weapon. He didn't holster it. He wasn't that naive, but he let out a slow breath, trying to steady himself. "Fine. Let's say I believe you. Let's say this was all just a misunderstanding." He looked at the man. "What were you doing out here?" The man gave him a slow smile. "That, officer, is not your concern." Before Reynolds could respond, the woman stepped forward and held out a sleek black card. "If anyone asks, this stop never happened." Reynolds glanced at the card. It was blank except for a phone number. No name. No department. Just a direct line to someone. Everything in him screamed that this wasn't right, that he was letting something slip through his fingers. But what choice did he have? this was bigger than him. The man stepped past him and slid effortlessly back into his car. The woman gave Reynolds one last look, then turned and climbed into the SUV. The two men followed, and just like that, they were gone. Reynolds stood alone in the middle of the street, the flashing lights of his patrol car suddenly feeling far too bright. His hand tightened around the black card as he watched the taillights disappear into the night. He had spent his career thinking he knew how the world worked, that there were rules, boundaries, that the badge gave him authority. But tonight, for the first time, he realized the truth. There were people out there who operated on a whole different level. People who didn't answer to cops like him. And if he had pressed any further, he might not have lived to regret it. With a slow breath, Reynolds finally reached for his radio. His mouth was dry as he clicked the button. "Dispatch, disregard my last call." He hung up before they could ask questions. Then, without another word, he climbed back into his patrol car, turned off his lights, and drove away, leaving the night exactly as it was before he ever stopped that man. Unchanged, silent, and full of secrets he was never meant to uncover.